Episode 50 of the Hoop Threads podcast here with my man, Adam Spinella of Boys Latin School in Baltimore, Maryland. How's it going, Adam?
Hey, Aaron, thanks for having me on. Really excited to be talking some hoops with you today.
Great to have a YouTube legend on the pod today. So definitely want to pick your brain about that further down the line. But let's go back to kind of where it all started, talk about what got you interested in basketball, your playing career, and then leading into your coaching career.
Sure. So playing career, I guess more so lack thereof, but we'll get into that a little bit. I'm a Michael Jordan baby. I was born and grew up in the craze of him in the 90s with the Chicago Bulls and fell in love with the game of basketball at a really young age. Started playing when I was in first grade and did AAU all growing up, the whole 9 yards with it, to the point where whenever we took a family vacation, my parents would always be really upset with me because I would spend all my time finding the one place to play or watch basketball. I remember specifically in 2000, they chose a place to go to that didn't have televisions in it, except for one in the business center. And on Saturday and Monday nights for the Final Four in the championship game, I found my way there to watch a local legend from where I grew up, Matt Bonner, who was playing the national title game. So I'm from Concord, New Hampshire, which not really known for basketball in that area. So that's what kind of took me away when it got time to go to college and look elsewhere. But my experience in high school wasn't a great player by any means, decent shooter, but I lacked a combination of size, skill, and athleticism. When you go over 3 in those categories, you're not making much of an impact on the court. But I knew I loved the game and wanted to get into it in some form or fashion. So when I went to college, I went to Dickinson College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, high academic Division III school out there, and was home for winter break my freshman year in college. It was my first time not being a part of a sports team. I'd been parts of so many different teams when I was growing up, and in high school played a million different sports, but felt very empty as a freshman in college not being a part of the team. So when I got home, I stayed in really close touch with the assistant coach at my high school, who had then gotten a JV head coaching job about an hour away from where I grew up. And for the 5 or 6 weeks that I was home over that winter break, I would drive to practice, assist him and help out with the JV team, and then head home. And I caught the itch. I knew I wanted to coach, and that was what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. So I went back to Dickinson and met with the head coach and the assistant coach there and said, please let me help out with the program, be a manager, a student assistant, whatever I can do to learn from you. I want to be a coach someday. And was incredibly fortunate to be surrounded by 2 great mentors there, Ethan Stewart Smith and Alan Soretti, both of which are head coaches in the college ranks right now. And was also really fortunate to be part of successful teams at Dickinson, where my senior year, the last game I was clapping on the bench for was in the Elite 8 of the Division III NCAA tournament. So really, really fortunate just to be in the kind of the right situation around the right people. But it left no doubt in my mind that this was kind of the career for me. So graduated in 2014, wanted to figure out what level was going to be best for me to coach at. So went to the prep school route, was a high school history teacher, taught AP government and a varsity basketball assistant at a school in Indiana called the Culver Military Academy. Was there for 3 years. And then again, that itch to scratch, wanted to get into the college game, see what recruiting was like. So, try a different level, a higher level of hoops, so to speak. And just spent the last 4 years coaching at college before, realizing with my fiance that we wanted a little bit different of a work-life balance, and was really fortunate to get the opportunity to be the head coach here at the Boys Latin School in Maryland. Unbelievable community, great league. Baltimore's a terrific city. I just feel incredibly lucky to be landing in this spot before the age of 30.
Let's take it back real quick, because I'm also a D3 product, SUNY Cortland, upstate New York. I don't know if we talked about that, but D3 product and a JUCO product. So did go to grad school at Syracuse, but that's a story for another day. So that was my start too. D3, our coach often said, there's no Division 4. When it was mainly when he was setting up tables for tournaments and stuff with us. But talk about the experience of being a manager and what you learned from that experience, because there are some times where you're just like, I really hate this job.
Yeah, I think it's very humbling in a lot of ways. Now, the stereotypical view of what a manager is at the Division I level, standing there with a clipboard and charting things all practice, or on the baseline with a towel over your shoulder, just waiting to mop up the floor if somebody falls. Like that's not really the version that you have in Division III. A lot of the times, it's very sensationalized. So did I have to do those things and keep the score clock during practices and stat different things? Yeah, of course, that's part of the job as a manager. But I was also able to be very hands-on in all the other aspects of coaching, where the two coaches that were on staff there at Dickinson would invite me into post-practice or pre-practice sessions to go over the practice plan, to see what goes into that whole process of trying to figure out what we need to do based on ourselves and our opponent. I learned how to break down film and use the software and the technology that they had there, which I felt at 21 years old was really setting me up to succeed and know what was expected of me when I started to coach as soon as I graduated. Division III, I think, gets a bad rap a lot of times because it's not Division I or Division II, where scholarship money is really on the line, and it's seen as a lesser brand of basketball. I couldn't think that's farther from the truth. I think it's really high level of skill. It's not the same size or athleticism, but the guys who are going through that process are doing it because of passion for the game. They're there because they love it. There's no scholarship or carrot dangling over their head. Most of them realize they're not going to play after their 4 years in college, that this is it. Mm-hmm. And for the amount of work that they have to put in during the season, during the off season, in the weight room, all that goes into it, I really grew to admire my friends and teammates who I was around, and just being at that level with how much passion is involved. It felt right and comfortable for me for a really long time. Again, I think it's just vastly underrated as a level.
Got you. We were speaking a little bit before, we started here, and you were a part of some pretty big turnarounds, at each spot. Talk about what goes into that, keeping up the morale of the guys in your locker room during those difficult times at the beginning, and kind of, staying the course, in that way. And I mean, because the players really feel that, they feel the energy from the coaches, because if the coach is like, yeah, we're some shit this year, they're never going to really turn it around. So what goes into engineering those turnarounds?
Sure. I'll be the first to admit, Aaron, that I am very lucky to have been in some of those situations, that there is very little that I did that helped engineer or be part of those turnarounds. I was kind of right place at right time with a bunch of people that were working really hard, and the players are 100% the ones that make all of that happen. I think anytime you're going through challenging seasons, when you have to be, especially at the college level, you have to be there because you love the school and you love your teammates. That, especially as a coach, our job is to challenge and push you, and really to hold up a mirror and show you what's going to be expected of you if you want to reach a certain level. And a lot of times when you're 2-17 coming down the stretch of a season, holding up a mirror and showing what you need to do means you need to work harder, and delivering those messages and being tough on guys. Some other times it means doing a lot of teaching and slowing things down. So the twofold approach to this is, on one hand, you just have to hold up the mirror and make sure that the right people are in the locker room to be part of that turnaround, and be even more selective with the people that you invite in. I think a lot of times when you're struggling, it's very appealing to say, let's get that guy. He's a good basketball player, but maybe sacrifice the fit of the human being for the team and for the locker room. And I think that's cutting corners. I don't think that's how you end up getting it done. Continue to steal a line from Sam Hinkie, trust the process, get the right people in your locker room. And if your process is right, if the amount of work that you put in is the right one, then the results will eventually come. And I think that the spots that I've been at aren't proof of anything special that I've done or those around me have done, just that there's patience and trust in the plan that we have putting together, not just by the coaches, but by the players that allow you to eventually get there.
We'll talk about, philosophy in a second, but what was attracted to you about Boys Latin? What's getting you so excited about this coming season?
Well, it's the MIAA Conference, Aaron. It's very hard not to be excited about that. We get to go up against Mount St. Joe's twice a year and St. Francis twice a year and all the other unbelievable, you know, athletic schools in our league. It's a really high level of basketball. And I'm excited for the challenge that comes from that. I think a lot of times there's a perception of Division III basketball not being a really high level. I'm really excited to dive in and be able to coach and coach against players of so many different outcomes by the time that they end up leaving their high school careers. In particular with boys Latin, it really meshes with the priorities that I have as a human being. It's an academic first environment, and that's something that I really, really believe in, preparing students for life in college and beyond. There's a lot of sacrifice that goes into the school because you have to be well-rounded. They value multi-sport athletes. They value guys that are going to be involved in something more than just basketball. And that's the message that we really preach as a team and as a program, that you're not just here to come to practice for 2 hours a day or step onto the court and perform for that, 32 minutes that you're out there. Be the best human being that you can be and maximize your time in high school, because every single experience that you get is a building block for the great person you can become in the future. And I think that our approaches to both relationship building and building well-rounded young men really made this the ideal fit for me long-term, in a place that I can see myself settling in and making a career out of it.
This may be a bit premature, but and you don't have to tell me if that's not something you can say, but you have any big boys on the schedule? Are you planning on playing in any tournaments? Can you kind of talk about what you anticipate this coming year? Are you scheduling tough and you kind of want to just hit the ground running, or easing into the conference season because you do play in such a prestigious and difficult conference?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think right now we're still finalizing a little bit of the schedule. We are playing in the MABC, the Mid-Atlantic Basketball Classic, that's going to be held, I believe, on December 11th. So we're fortunate to be playing in that event, which I think is going to give great exposure to our guys. To back up a little bit about the situation here at Boys Latin, taking over for an unbelievable coach in Cliff Reese, who decided to retire after bringing Boys Latin to unprecedented success during his time here, and moving the school up from the B conference to the A conference in the MIAA. But last year with the pandemic, I think it threw a wrench in plans for a lot of people. And at Boys Latin, we're one of the only schools in our league and the only A conference school who opted out of having a season last year. So I think more than anything, our emphasis during the summer months, during the fall, and the early parts of the season are going to be on trying to make up for that lost time, having a little bit more practice times as opposed to loading up on games. Even though there's going to be that excitement to get out there from our guys, we got to make sure that our principles, our fundamentals are completely in place. And I know you're going to ask me some questions about program philosophy and team building and all of that stuff. I'm a firm believer that you have to have a very sound and strong structural foundation in place. And if we go out there with 2.5 weeks of practice, our first 2.5 weeks of practice in almost 2 years before we start going into that game gauntlet and scheduling up against the mighty powers of the world in this area, that probably doesn't do us enough good. So it's not as much scheduling with the types of opponents that we play, as much as it is trying to make sure we leave ample room for practice time early in this season. And as we move forward, we're going to continue to be as aggressive with our scheduling as possible.
Got you. We can definitely talk about that off air too, as far as putting you in touch with some coaches. Let's talk about, program philosophy. What do you, Coach Spinella, stand for? Maybe what things are you bringing with you, from your previous stops? What have you learned that you're going to kind of bring into, your philosophy now that's changed, since you started, as a college coach?
Sure. I think everything starts and stops with the values that we espouse as a program. A lot of places talk about their program pillars. I prefer to think of it more like a moral compass, where if there's ever a difficult decision that we as coaches or the players and people within our program are faced with, hopefully they go back to this compass and this terminology to try to figure out what the best decision for them to make is going to be. And ours is centered around the word grit, growth, resilience, integrity, and togetherness. Those are the four concepts that we really believe in first and foremost.
Mhm.
And I think that anytime you're, the smallest school in the A conference, one of them that has higher academic standards, more that you have to be involved in at the school than some of your competitors, you have to have that chip on your shoulder and say, it's not that we have to overcome all of these things, is that we get to. We're fortunate that we have all of this, but we need to have grit in order to attack it. So every single day, we're looking for growth. We want guys to have a growth mindset, to get better every day, come into the gym with a thirst for getting better. We need resilience, because when adversity comes, and it, as you know, undoubtedly does at every point during the year, some team faces adversity. We need to be able to respond to it. Integrity is a non-negotiable for us. I know we mentioned it earlier, having the right people in your locker room and in your program is vital. We will not cut any corners in that regard in order to be successful. And then togetherness. This is a team sport, and it requires sacrifice. If you agree that the sum of the parts is less than the whole, that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, and are willing to sacrifice and do things together, that's how we reach our goals as a team. So we're going to talk a lot about grit. In terms of offense or defense, any of those things, I just think, pace is important to us. We want to play fast. We want to be a team that shoots a decent amount of threes, puts pressure on the rim, and plays in transition. And defensively, the term is dictate. We are not going to be a team that sits back and lets the team that's playing against us just run their offense and get to their spots. We want to be able to put pressure on our opponent in the half court and in the full court, and make sure that we are dictating to them what types of shots they take.
I like that. Let's see. What I guess when you moved here, you did move here, right? Yeah, you weren't, yeah, you weren't already living here. What was kind of some of your first steps as far as, reaching out to high school coaches in the area, reaching out to AAU guys, finding your assistants? What were some of the priorities, right off the bat, reaching out to players and stuff like that? I should stop now before I name everything. It looks like I named a couple that you had in mind, but what were some of the first steps, when you came here to get things rolling at Boys Latin?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, my priority is always going to be on the players that are within our program and their families. So those were some of our first steps, is getting phone numbers, contact info, reaching out to the players before I moved down here, setting up Zoom conversations with their parents, whether it was with them individually as a family to talk about their goals and their experience, or with parents as a whole to make sure that we went over the pillars of our program, so to speak, what we stand for, our guidelines, all of that stuff.
Gotcha.
I've spent a lot of time talking with other coaches here at Boys Latin, because I know it's a unique atmosphere and environment, and learning from some of those who have been successful at our school, trying to spend time, with our lacrosse coach, Brian Farrell, who has coached BL to the MIAA championship this year, and is always a notorious top 5 or top 6 program in the nation, picking his brain on how are you successful at a school that's predominantly day students. Boys Latin is moving towards a boarding model. So having a lot of conversations with our admissions folks, with the director of the boarding program, to try to figure out what type of student is going to fit in here at Boys Latin. And the more synergy that we have as a group, and the more understanding I'm able to gain early on of Boys Latin, the more effective the conversations will be with those AAU coaches, with other coaches in the area who might be able to help get us players. So I really wanted to be intentional in coming in here of, first and foremost, making sure that I had a firm grasp of the school before going out there and trying to figure out, hey, is this player, still looking for a school, or who do you have that might be interested? If we're going to be intentional about making sure the person is the right fit for Boys Latin, it's incumbent upon us to understand what that means. So that's where a lot of our focus has gone. Yeah, we've reached out to a bunch of the coaches and the different folks in these areas, but making sure we take care of the players that we have and have a great understanding of the school, to me, are priorities 1 and 1A.
2 more questions on Boys Latin. The first one, what are some of your coaching pet peeves?
Coaching pet peeves. Oh, that's a good question. I don't know if I've ever been asked that before.
I can name mine to give you a second to think of yours. So mine is, especially if you turn the ball over, if you take a bad shot, if you don't get back on defense on the other end, and especially if you foul at the other end, I'm taking you out immediately. I don't care how good you are, your minute situation, if your parent paid for the trip, that's a non-negotiable for me. So you got one? A couple?
I always say buy-in and effort are the two things that are non-negotiable anytime you step on a basketball floor. So it's a lack of hustle, a lack of sprinting up and down the floor, whether after a turnover, getting back on defense, whatever it is. If you're not bought into what we're doing and trying to play one-on-one, or if your effort isn't where we know it can be, those are kind of the two bugaboos for me.
Got you. So this past year with the pandemic, there was a lot of coaching Zooms with play diagrams, with culture, a lot of information being passed around. What's maybe a nugget that you picked up about dealing with players, or Spain pick and roll? What's something that you picked up during those times that you're going to implement this year?
Yeah, I tried to steer away from the X's and O's and to move a lot more towards player development. And maybe it was wise, maybe it was just boredom, but had this thought process that pretty much everybody's losing a year because of the pandemic. How do you make up for that through player development? And the kind of philosophy that I've developed or continued to nuance since that time has been pick 4 or 5 things for each player and make those just your routine. Don't go out above and beyond that. Teach the basics, continue to hammer home the basics. And at some point, more individual sessions, or once they show complete mastery of those, is when you move on. So really taking a more simplified approach. I say reteaching the 100 level sometimes isn't the worst thing in the world. So that's really what I've picked up on the most.
One thing that I'll mention real quick, and if you want to be connected with him, I can make that happen. College of Kobe, that worked quite a bit with Poly, but also works with I'm gonna butcher it. I think it's Pro Sweat or Sweat Performance, something in Baltimore. And he said that when he's talking to his basketball clients, it's what part of the court do you feel least comfortable on, and in what situation. So if it's left side elbow, that's where they're going to be focusing their work. And he said that he never starts a training session without asking that, and without asking what they feel they need to work on. And then he kind of tailors it to that, because as I'm sure by now, it's not a one size fits all approach. Each player needs something tailored, especially for something that's specific in their development. So let's move on to the video stuff. So you started a blog, and that's kind of where some of the video stuff originated, but then you also work with Fast Draw quite a bit. I can never follow the diagrams. I mean, all love to the Fast Draw people, but it's just not my cup of tea. So talk about that experience and what it kind of adds to your coaching repertoire.
Sure. So I know, as I mentioned earlier, on my journey when I was in college as a manager, trying to figure out ways to give myself credibility, show that I knew how to do the job before I got it, because I think that's always really important in landing yourself a gig. Basketball coaching is a competitive world. What can you do to set yourself apart? So I started this blog called The Box and One, which was initially just me putting out diagrams of play of the days that I was drawing up or seeing from other teams, what they were running on video, and then writing some thoughts about games and series during the NBA playoffs as they were going. And through doing that, I got hooked up with the Fast Draw guys, ended up contributing some of the play diagrams to content there. And my fascination with X's and O's really took off from that point. Started to incorporate more video into that in about 2016. But for me, it was always a way of showing I knew what I was talking about a little bit to help myself gain some credibility, but also learning trends as they're ongoing. We as coaches have to constantly be evolving in what we do, because the game is always evolving. And players, when they come to you in high school and college, whatever, are more skilled and have a diverse set of skill sets than they ever have before. So if our X's and O's knowledge, if our thirst for learning about the game continues to be on point, I think that really sets yourself up to be an effective coach. So I always viewed it not as much about me teaching others and trying to self-promote as much as it is just showing knowledge and trying to say that by doing this stuff and forcing myself to have a play of the day and cut up these video edits and do a daily ATO section on Twitter, the more that I'm able to force myself to incorporate that in my schedule, it essentially becomes mandated professional development time.
I like that. Um, let's do one more thing on video. Just, I mean, you don't have to go super in depth, but what was the process like for, putting together the videos that you do? How has that evolved over time? You know, a lot of it's, stealing what great people do in your industry and kind of making it your own, at least in my experience. But, kind of talk about how you've streamlined that process. And, is it just you're watching games and a player sticks out and you're like, oh, I'm gonna do one on, Aaron Proya of, the Boston Celtics. How does that work?
So I'm assuming you're referring more to the NBA draft scouting.
Yeah.
And how this process works. So, quick backstory here. Getting into college coaching, it's about 2019. I've just completed my second year of college coaching and want to figure out a way to become a little bit more efficient at evolving players when I go to AAU tournaments, camps, high school games, whatever it ends up being. How can I really make sure that I'm sharp on noticing their skills quickly? And said, well, maybe the easiest way to do that is instead of doing as many X's and O's, I convert more towards college scouting and almost NBA draft scouting reports and use that as practice. So that was around the time that Mike Schmitz and Jonathan Gavoni got bought out by ESPN. And there was this kind of niche on YouTube that needed to be filled with draft content. So for me, it was almost killing two birds with one stone. The process for going through that, I always try to simultaneously, capitalize on the bigger names that are out there and try to find nuanced ways to approach those players in different ways. And then also through just watching a bunch of games, watching film, having contacts or people that I'm talking to and hearing from, trying to bring out some of those sleepers or dark horses, so to speak, and just be an advocate for guys that I believe in and their game really appeals to me.
Gotcha. Yeah, I like a lot of the little details. Like I think the one that I remember was I think it was the point guard from West Virginia. I'm blanking on his name right now.
Deuce McBride.
Deuce. I think in your video of that, you showed his defense against guards in late clock situations, at the end of halves, at end of games. And I think that's something that really translates. And that's like a really little nuance that I really like that you picked out. Let's move on to kind of just general, thoughts on basketball. Do you think that someone pointed it out a couple months ago? I think it was I don't want to give John Rothstein credit, but I think it was him. The 2-point guard model is pretty big in college basketball. And that hasn't really permeated through to the NBA yet. I feel like it's more having a secondary ball handler, as far as a point forward goes, or someone that can really pass it in your second unit. Do you see that ever catching on in the NBA? And what do you think makes it, so successful at the college level?
Yeah, it's a great question. At the NBA level now, we're all byproducts of where skill development takes us on the youth circuits, AAU, and in college. So what we see in the NBA now are guys like Giannis Antetokounmpo, Kevin Durant, and Ben Simmons, who are all 6'10" and taller, but able to do all of these things with the ball in their hands. And I think that that's really changed the traditional model of how a roster is built, as well as what a point guard really does on the floor, so to speak. But the NBA is always going to be a byproduct of the most successful teams. And you try to find ways to construct a roster that can compete with them, but beat them in different areas. And I think what we're seeing now is kind of the return of position groupings, where I think a lot of people were trying to build a roster that had like one big, one guard, and 3 wings kind of sandwiched in the middle that were very interchangeable and switchable. And not that that's necessarily wrong or you can't win a championship that way, but it seems the game is moving more towards, okay, one big, 2 wings, and then 2 different guards that can both handle, create out of the pick and roll, make shots off ball. That's almost the Phoenix Suns type of model right now, right? Where Chris Paul and Devin Booker can each play with the ball in their hands. You've got more guys like Jay Crowder and Mikal Bridges in the front court who are both wings and strong, long defenders, but more in that 3 or 4 spot on the floor.
Mhm.
And then the big man in DeAndre Ayton. So I think that, to your original question about 2 point guards or maybe 2 handlers that can co-create for each other, I think that we're on the verge of transitioning more into that area, but with the caveat of one of them probably has to be able to guard up, because there are still a lot of teams that are bigger wings 2 through 4, kind of in the Boston Celtics mold for where they were with Gordon Hayward, Jason Tatum, and Jaylen Brown. If you're trotting out there 2 guys that are 6'1", 6'2", and one of them has to guard Jaylen Brown or Gordon Hayward, that might be a little bit difficult.
We're gonna get to that later. We're gonna get to the Celtics glut of wings later. This is a quick one, I guess. What do you read or listen to boost your basketball IQ, whether that's your intention or not?
So massive shout out to a good friend of mine, Zach Bover, assistant at Indiana State with pickandpop.net. He does an unbelievable job there. One of my hiking buddies during the pandemic, he and I would meet up, talk X's and O's, and go on some long walks. So anything that he puts out there, I wholeheartedly trust and know that he does it with a coach's perspective at heart. I think Slapping Glass, the newer YouTube channel and podcast series that has really popped up, has been really, really fascinated. And then the NABC just has a ton of great coaching clinics that come around during March. I think the great part about the pandemic and turning everything into a virtual format is that you don't have to go there in person, listen to it for one day, take copious notes, and then have to remind yourself of things later. There are video snippets. There are things in that regard. I'd like to say I'm a big podcast guy. I listen to the Low Post as much as anybody else out there, but quite frankly, over the last year or so, not having those long recruiting car drives anymore, not doing as much podcast listening as I used to.
I would definitely recommend a good buddy of yours, I guess I could call him. Fran Fraschilla has a great podcast called The World of Basketball. And I think it's interesting to see how people from different countries view the game, and then the differences in perspective between player and coach. And sometimes he's had like GMs and stuff like that on there as well. What was Zach's name again, real quick, so I can?
Bover.
Is it Boisvert? Yeah. Okay. All right. I already follow him. Good. That's good to hear. All right. So I want to talk about the development of players on a young team. We're talking about the NBA right now. The development of young players, of rookies, or first 2 or 3 years guys on a young team versus a contender. What you've seen that process look like. How it differs, and what you like or don't like versus the different team approaches to that development of those players.
Yeah, I always come at things from a coach's perspective. Maybe that's just because of my role, but that's kind of how I view development as a whole. So when you're on a championship caliber team, there's a very tight box that a young player typically fits into. Part of that is the reason that the team drafted that young player. Hey, we have LeBron James and Anthony Davis, and we're getting Russell Westbrook. We need somebody that can come in and just knock down shots. Like whatever it is around that team.
Several.
Several. But you're expected to come in and be a role player and fit in this pretty narrow box and excel at the things that you do. So from a skill development perspective, those development staffs with the Lakers, for example, would spend more time on, hey, we run this action. This is how you get your shots as a result of it. Let's make sure that you're elite at it. Let's just go repetition, repetition, repetition. Hey, you're a big man. We run drop coverage because we have Brook Lopez as our starting center on this team. So let's make sure we drafted you because you're good at drop coverage. Let's make sure you continue to be even better at it at an NBA level. Maybe a good example for that is Udoka Azubuike with the Utah Jazz, who's backing up Rudy Gobert, right? Almost a copy and paste version of defense from what he did at Kansas versus what Rudy Gobert did in Utah. So I think the expectations more so for role players are, here's what you need to do to see the floor to help us. We're going to develop you to stay in here. And they may become really good in that role, but they don't have much that gets developed outside of it. Whereas if you're on a team that doesn't have championship aspirations from day one, you have the opportunity to grow just as an individual player with focus in the eyes of the organization for how they best see you. But you can add different facets to your game and work on them against live competition when you get those reps, those minutes in NBA games in ways that probably make you a better, well-rounded basketball player once that process is done. So I don't really have a bugaboo with either a development strategy, because this is all about winning. Whether it's at the high school, college, or pro level, everything is about trying to win a championship and win games. So when you come into an organization, whether it's the Oklahoma City Thunder starting a complete rebuild or the Los Angeles Lakers getting ready to win a championship next year, your goal is, every time you step into the gym, is what I'm doing right now going to eventually help my franchise get to that level? And that's where I put a lot of trust in the development staffs, the coaches, and the organizations to have the vision for what it takes to get there, and try to be, from my very limited perspective as a YouTube guy and somebody who just watches games from the periphery, not to judge and say, oh, they need to be using BJ Boston differently. Like, no, that's not for me to say. I'm not developing the team. I'm not setting the plan and the vision for the future. But it always takes patience for those first couple of years to continually remind yourself of, hey, it's up to them. It's going to take time. Let's not jump to any conclusions right away.
Got you. A good friend of mine, I don't know if you follow him. If you don't, you definitely should. PD Webb. I did a great podcast with him where I felt like I was in a classroom. He says that feel is teachable. How do you go about teaching that, if that's something that you agree with?
Like everything else in life, I agree to a certain extent. I don't think it's an absolute, but PD is one of the best. I know, actually, that's where you and I ended up meeting, I believe, on one of those sessions that we did there. So
yeah.
Yep.
Last week. I should remember this.
But no, I think feel is taught in the sense that if you put a player in the same situation time and time and time again, they are going to develop the feel, the understanding, the comfort in those situations, not just in how to read them, but how to dictate them. I think that's the difference between understanding and feel. Understanding is knowing what the defense is giving you and making the right decision based off of that. Feel is how do you manipulate and dictate to the defense so you get what you want out of the possession. And again, the more that you're placed in, I don't want to say copy and paste or the exact same situation, but if you're running ball screens in your offense and you're running side ball screens with the corner filled, run that every single time. Practice that a ton out of those situations, and you become so much better at reading those plays, and feel that ends up getting developed.
Gotcha. Like that. So this is kind of, I'm going to use this player, this prospect in this recent draft to ask two questions. So the first is, what do you look for in deciphering what players could do in a different role? Because I'm going to use Josh Primo. Because I was listening to an interview with the Spurs GM. He was talking about his role was basically to catch and shoot. Like that was his role at Alabama. And we envisioned him being able to do both, be a combo guard, be able to handle the ball, be able to attack off ball screens. What goes into being able to see them in a different role? And then the second part of the question is drafting regardless of the position that you're in. If a guy is your guy, picking your guy, not having a hesitation on, if Jalen Johnson is there at 10, should I trade back or should I just take the guy that I know and trust my evaluation? You know what I'm saying? So
Yeah. So I'll answer the second one first. Always draft the guy that you want. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of playing the market analysis, so to speak. If you've got a guy that you want, don't wait for him because he may not be there. And then all of a sudden you're kicking yourself. So I would rather pass on a guy that I'm not enamored with, even if he's rumored to be in that range, than risk trading back or moving down into what I think someone's range is, and someone else was thinking the same way as me initially, valued that player and took him ahead of me.
Hmm.
So that's the scenario that I don't want to happen, which means I'd rather reach, so to speak. For the first part of that question, in evaluating what you can't see, I always go back to anytime I'm scouting, writing a scouting report, doing video breakdowns. I have a 10 commandments of basketball scouting out there, and I'll send it to you when we get done. But one of the ones on there for me is, just because a player doesn't do it doesn't mean they can't.
Mm.
The best example of this for me, I know you brought up Josh Primo and how he was played at Alabama. The best example for me continues to be Kentucky basketball. How many guys that they have in there that play the 2 guard spot, like Jamal Murray, like Devin Booker, Tyler Hero, Emmanuel Quickly. They're used more in an off-ball role. They're constantly darting around floppy screens and actions that are in the lane and coming out to the corners. They don't get a lot of reps out of the pick and roll when they're there. And a lot of it is because when you're comparing them with the other players in their backcourt, they're the best shooter of that group. And they get pigeonholed and moved within John Calipari's offense into just being a shooter. And time again, we've seen all of those guys we just listed come into the NBA and prove that they can do so much more with the ball in their hands, whether it's creating out of the pick and roll for themselves and for others, or in late clock isolation situations. Like, how many big shots did Jamal Murray and Devin Booker hit this past year? Like, those guys didn't necessarily show that in college, but it doesn't mean that they couldn't do it or wouldn't one day develop the ability to get there. So I think a lot of it has to do with maximizing the time that these teams get in their individual workouts, putting guys in situations that they believe are applicable to the pro game and exploring it, and then really doing their homework and digging back to high school and AAU sessions. I'll use Emmanuel Quickly as an example because he played here in the MIAA in the MIAA Conference. He was a point guard in high school and played a ton with the ball in his hands. And there were all these questions coming out of Kentucky. Is he really a lead guard? Can he do this? He was such an off-ball player at Kentucky. And all I'm hearing in my head is, did you watch this kid play when he was in high school? Have you done your due diligence to dig into him on that side of things? Because he's really good with the ball in his hands. He's very good at creating his own shot. And with Josh Primo, I think a lot of that was the same way. If you look at what he did for Team Canada or playing on the Canadian national circuit, he's really good with the ball in his hands. And you're right, his role at Alabama was different. But just because he wasn't asked to do something there doesn't mean he wasn't capable of doing it. So I think it's a matter of research and digging and understanding the context of the player's college role or whatever their pre-NBA role is, and then being able to back up what your suspicions about that tell you in an individual workout setting.
Next one is, it could be hypothetical. It could be a championship that's already been won. Who's a NBA free agent or a new player, that they traded for and acquired that year, who swung a title that kind of fits what you look for in a player?
Fits what you look for in a player. That's a really interesting question. I mean, forecasting for this year ahead, I think Patty Mills to Brooklyn was an unbelievable signing for them because he has championship level experience. He's willing to play and thrive in any role that you give him. He's good on ball. He's good off ball. He always defends, buys into whatever's going to be asked of him. I think that that's a no BS signing by the Brooklyn Nets that really gives them a much needed playmaking insurance policy if Kyrie Irving goes down. And as we know, he's pretty injury prone of late. I mean, I think back to, the most well-constructed teams of the last decade. I mean, Golden State is obviously one in terms of longevity that they had. But I think on the flip side of that coin, those Miami Heat teams built around LeBron, Wade, and Bosh continually had veterans that came in and embraced their role and kind of sacrificed for the team. And none stands out to me more than a guy like Shane Battier, because I think I love him.
I'm a Cavs fan and a UNC fan, so I hate to hear it, but I know where you're going with this.
And you went to Syracuse, and I'm a Duke fan who went to Georgetown for grad school. So you and I have a lot of bones to pick with each other. But what Battier did for that team in playing so many different roles, he would play the 3, he would play the 4, and that was at a time when positional versatility in the front court was just kind of starting to be really in vogue with small ball lineups. That, Chris Bosh going to the 5 and moving those around was really important. I just, everything that he did for that team and embracing his role stands out to me as somebody that swung a championship level and is a culture changer for the better.
Phenomenal flopper. Phenomenal. We know where you learned that. We'll move on from that one. All right. So let's talk about, is there, this is more like draft philosophy. Is there a player type that you value less than the consensus?
Less than the consensus? Non-shooting point guards. Or lead guards who are going to struggle to hit shots out of the pick and roll, because I think there's nothing more debilitating in a postseason series than under coverage. Teams that go underneath ball screens and say, no, I want you to shoot it. I think it stalls out offense. It's too much of a mental game for guys to buy into. It's something that I completely want to avoid. So if I'm putting the ball in your hands out of the pick and roll, I want you to be able to stretch it out to 3 consistently.
Let's talk about it, from this past year's draft, a character guy who will change a losing culture.
Jeremiah Robinson Earl in Oklahoma City.
I love that. I love that.
Villanova is role player university. And JRE doesn't just come in with the ability to thrive and do great in whatever role he's going to be asked to do. He is a culture changer. He's one of those guys. I compare him to Jared Dudley. Some people saw that as like an insult. It's like, why? Jared Dudley has stuck around through the league for 15 years, made a career out of standing in corners, knocking down threes, and doing all the dirty work for everybody. His teammates love him. He sits next to LeBron watching AAU games all year in the offseason. Like, what a life that is. You're telling me you don't want that life?
I feel that. Let's talk about, recency bias versus growth. A lot of the time, especially toward the end of the year for players, if he's shot terribly the entire year and then the NCAA tournament, he gets hot, seeing that versus, maybe it's just he tweaked his form, or maybe it's just you see something different in his shot. Kind of talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. Aaron, everything is a data point. That's really the biggest philosophy for me. And if you have that mentality, anytime you scout, anytime you watch a game, anytime you read an article on a guy, it becomes less about, hey, my opinion is going to really swing because of this performance. And it grounds you enough to say, okay, I'm doing everything I can to tune out recency bias, to not be affected by, oh, Aaron Nesmith went 7 for 9 from Summer League last night. Now I'm really excited to have him on my team, right? You have to cool the jets a lot of time and realize that the percentages, the numbers, the games, they all bear out over an 82-game season, and hopefully 16 wins in the playoffs for a championship team. So I am always really skeptical of recency bias. Now, how does that relate to growth for a prospect? I think it comes down to the consistency, and it comes down to identifying what has changed about a player, right? So on the consistency point, if you're paying somebody millions of dollars, you're not paying them to do it where they perform really well one night and then they have 3 or 4 where they kind of go missing. Like, you want consistency. You need consistency to be a championship level team and to depend on the investments that you make as an organization. So the 7 of 9 shooting one night, but 1 of 5, 1 of 6 the next 2 doesn't really do anything for me. And that's where a lot of times recency bias, where you see cherry picked numbers out there of, well, he was 7 of 16 in his last 3 games. It's like, no, he had 1 game where he couldn't miss and he was bad in the other 2. Like, that's not recent. That is recency bias, but that's not growth. So I think it's finding consistency and choosing a large enough sample size to be able to compare it and see if there's growth. The other part of it, as I mentioned, is making sure you have an understanding about what's changed. Is it something mechanical? Is it a mentality? Is there a difference in the screening actions that a coach is using? And is he playing with different teammates? A lot of times, all that stuff matters, So I think you have to be able to identify what is changed if you're going to advocate for growth.
Yeah, I think a good example of that. I mean, it's not as much draft, but when Kawhi won the championship with the Raptors, it was like that whole summer they were like, "Oh, was he really the best player in the league all along?" I'm like, "No, LeBron's not in the playoffs and Kevin Durant's hurt." All right, let's slow it a little bit here. Um, Kind of going off that because you were just talking about stats and how they get cherry picked. What's a stat that gets twisted the most, especially when it comes to prospects?
Assist to turnover ratio.
Mm,
I'm not a huge fan of it. I think Cade Cunningham's case this year was a huge part of that.
mm,
Um, I can gift wrap you a layup opportunity, and if you miss it, it doesn't reflect well on me. And vice versa, if I'm the only good player on my team and I'm commanding double teams and I'm that good, yeah, I'm going to turn the ball over a little bit more. The raw numbers don't necessarily indicate how good of a playmaker, how secure of a ball handler, and what level of threat I am. Like, if to me, I'm not deterred when I see somebody that has 3 turnovers a game automatically. It probably means that they're so effing good that they deserve having the ball in their hands that much.
mm,
So I think assist to turnover ratio has been wildly overblown
mm.
and kind of fantasized as this all great point guards never turn it over and get a ton of assists when you just guys who have the great assist to turnover, it's not a knock on them, but it's not a qualification that you need in order to be good with the ball in your hands.
Yeah, I think LeBron leads the NBA in turnovers. I feel like he's up in the all-time list.
Westbrook every year. Yeah, like it.
Westbrook too. Luka, yeah, Luka as well. Who's a player that you're not giving up on? You can either pick last year's draft class or all time. Just a player that you always thought was going to be good. I can give you mine. It's
Go ahead.
Bruno Caboclo. I still think if he gets a chance that he can be something. I don't know if the shot making is going to stick at the NBA level, but I don't know. I always watched him play and really liked his game.
Probably the most recent guess for me would be Mo Bamba. I was a big believer in Mo Bamba. Saw him play AAU and know his high school program pretty well. Like, I just know he's a great kid. And I have this theoretical unicorn stretch 5 who can block so many shots at his size. Like, there's something about there where if he taps into that just a little bit more consistent shooting and masters all the angles he needs to take on defense, he's a really useful player.
I think that's why the Magic are holding on to him, because they know that if the Spurs sign him in free agency, that he's all of a sudden going to be a 16-10 guy. Kind of going off of that again, what's the biggest miss you've had as an evaluator, and what did it teach you?
Mo Bamba.
Yeah,
it was Mo Bamba. I had him number 1 in that class.
Yeah, give me another one.
Okay. Another miss that I had.
Unless that's your only miss.
No, I've had plenty. Malik Monk.
Mm.
I thought Malik Monk was going to be the third or fourth best player in that draft class that he was involved in there. And I think that there are some off-court challenges that may have popped up that have left it as a we'll never know if he would have turned into that player had certain things not happened to him in his life. But I think he was the one guy in that Kentucky link of those 2 guards that we talked about, right? The Jamal Murray's, Tyler Hero's, Devin Booker's. Like, that was where the theory really came from for me and why I was so incredibly high on Malik Monk.
So you would have taken Malik Monk over Donovan?
Yeah, I would have.
Okay. I have a friend that's a Jazz fan, and he also lives in Charlotte, and he still stands for Malik Monk. Who's the biggest sleeper or a UDFA that you hit on, and what did that teach you?
Sleeper that I hit on? Oh, geez, I don't know.
Last year I liked Mason Jones a lot, so I'm gonna.
Yeah, bear with me. I'm gonna bring up my board from 2020. I'll go 1 year back and see who kind of the highest guy on that list was that ended up panning out and doing something as a rookie that not a lot of others had on there. Well, I don't know if this would count. I had Devin Vassell 3rd on my board. And I think that he's continuing to fit in that way. But I'll give you another one. Teo Maledon for the Oklahoma City Thunder. He was a top 12 player on my board. Ended up going in the second round. Just incredible, like you said, incredibly solid player. I did a unique kind of player comparison to him, and I compared him to Tom Glavine, the former
Who?
Tom Glavine, the former Braves and Mets pitcher,
Okay.
a
That's fine.
baseball guy who could not throw a fastball over 85 miles an hour. But the change of speeds in his fastball to curveball or changeup allowed him to continue to fool players. Whereas the same thing with Malik. He's not going to be the most explosive guy. He's not the fastest, but he plays with a change of speed. And that's more impactful in the NBA than being a really fast guy who plays at one speed.
Got you. All right, let's move on to the Celtics. For your work with them, I'm gonna catch you hopefully off guard here. What were some of Danny Ainge's biggest strengths and weaknesses when it came to drafting?
All right, so I'm gonna throw out there one of my 10 commandments right now. I don't believe in the term weaknesses.
Okay.
I always think that it's improvement areas. Everybody talks about if they're right-handed, they say my left hand's my weak hand. Like, no, it's not. It's just a hand you haven't worked on enough yet. So always trying to have that growth mindset, that opportunistic ability. All of the stuff that we talk about is correctable, which means that it's just an area you need to improve. It's not a weakness. Danny Ainge was really good at understanding the assets that he had and realizing the kind of front office charades that you have to play in order to maximize your roster. I also, I think he fell in love with certain types of players as opposed to the players and the skills themselves. And that ultimately made him a very inconsistent drafter. But more times than not, I mean, and you look at the track record of success that he had there, he fielded teams that were in the playoffs almost every year. And that in itself, I think, means that he's much more successful than a lot of folks would be happy to give him credit for outside of Boston.
What do you wish he had traded those draft picks for?
I don't know. I don't know if I have one person, but I will tell you, the whole meme culture that goes on out there about, Danny Ainge was close to trading for this guy or for that guy and all these things that go on. To be able to withstand that and continue to build a team that went to 3 straight Eastern Conference finals and has drafted and developed the young players that they have in Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, kept Marcus Smart around. They've had the cachet to pull off some star trades and trade some of those young players or picks. And the fact that they haven't and have still been successful, I think that speaks loudly about him, Brad Stevens, and the whole organization.
I think I know where you're going to go with this question, but I'm going to ask it anyways. What's one decision that was either made, like they made the decision, or they didn't make the decision, like they didn't trade for this guy, they didn't cut this guy, they didn't resign this guy? What's one decision that would have drastically changed the Celtics' current situation?
Drastically changed the current situation. I'm very pro player. I don't root against guys. I want everybody to be able to succeed, whether that's in terms of, chasing the bag, as they say, and getting paid, or just being the best version of themselves that they can be every time they step on the floor. There's not one guy in the NBA that I kind of root against.
Yeah.
But I was, both as a fan and somebody who believes that loyalty deserves to be rewarded, I was a little bit jaded by the Kyrie Irving trade. Not as much because I didn't think Kyrie was a skill upgrade over Isaiah Thomas, or I think you have to have 100% loyalty to a guy like IT for all that he sacrificed and did for the team. But I never thought of Kyrie Irving as a guy who was going to lead the Celtics to a championship as the focal point of an organization. And what spoke loudest to me about that whole situation was he's coming off of NBA finals runs and a championship next to LeBron James, and felt the need to walk away from that to be the man and prove that he could do it himself. If you value winning and championships that much, or as much as I do in the team building process, to me, that's a turnoff. Again, less about IT, the player, the loyalty, and all that stuff. But that's a red flag for me when it comes to Kyrie Irving. And I think that there were other deals to make or other ways to resolve the impending Brinks truck that needed to be backed up for Isaiah Thomas and the injured hip and all those things. I think there was a better way to deal with that. And it really opened Pandora's box of the shuffling of major players and acquisitions over the last 4 years that has really, really stalled the continuity of the Celtics.
I think it's an interesting point too. I think it was the Woj pod that he had Griffin on, and it was one that Griffin caught a lot of heat for because he basically said that he left the Cavs because it wasn't organic team building. It was basically just get whoever LeBron wants. I thought it was interesting that he pointed out with the Kyrie wanting to leave thing that he had gone through all the struggles. He had lost all those games. He'd been playing pretty much by himself all those years. And it was finally his team, and he was finally rounding the corner as an NBA star. And then in comes LeBron. And it's just kind of like immediately, like, you don't get the option. You're the second banana now. And that's something that he really struggled with. And that's something that he felt he was ready for. And, everyone kind of understood, you get LeBron and you got a good shot at a title, especially in the East. But in defense of Kyrie, which I do not do very often, that was kind of something that was under discussed, I feel like. Who is this is a question from my friend. Who's going to score off of your bench this year? The Celtics.
Off of the Celtics bench?
Yeah.
Dennis Schroeder now. We got one.
Yeah. And then my last, I guess it's not as much of a question, more your comment on this philosophy that I have. I don't think your best two players, especially your best, like your top three, they can't have a redundant skill set. And they can't be in the same position. And the thing that's frustrated me with the Celtics is I kind of understand why they haven't moved either one of them, because it's like, first off, you're going to piss off either Jaylen Brown or Jason Tatum when they hear their name in trade talks, and that could go south very quickly. And then also, you're probably not going to get great value, for a young player, on decent contracts, that they represent. I guess talk about, if you agree with that, if that's something, maybe you agree with it to a certain extent, but when they signed Gordon Hayward, I was like, you already have two guys that play the same position, and then you added another wing that needs the ball in his hands. So I don't understand, the thought process beyond that.
I'll ask you this. I'll answer that by asking you a question.
Okay.
Do you think the Brooklyn Nets are a front runner to win the championship next year?
In the East or in general?
Just in general. Do you think that it's higher likelihood than not that they're in the NBA Finals?
I'm going to say yes, and that's actually because of their draft, because of some of the stuff they did in the offseason. I like the moves that they made around the edges. And when you have two top five guys in Durant and Harden, then yeah, I think you can.
I would say that, to that point, that Kyrie Irving and James Harden are the same position, in the sense that they're both best with the ball in their hands.
Just don't call Harden a point guard. Just don't call Harden a point guard. Just don't do it. Don't do it.
He's led the league in offensive creation and creation for others each of the last few years. He's an MVP caliber player with the ball in his hands, as is Kyrie Irving, as is Kevin Durant. I think it's position to me is about who you can guard, not what your offensive skill set is.
Yeah.
So I'm not deterred by saying, hey, we have three isolation scorers in Harden, Irving, and Durant. Where's all the touches going to come from? That's about who you surround him with, right? Like a lob catching threat like DeAndre Jordan or Nick Claxton, a gravity movement shooter like Joe Harris, guys who can come in and defend like Bruce Brown. Like that stuff makes them a championship level team. But it's not a case of you can't win with those two guys or those three guys coexisting. And I think it's the same case in Boston. Like Tatum and Brown are both diverse enough offensive players who can space the floor while the other has the ball, score it in the same areas of the floor or in different ways, that you can construct a championship level roster around them, and they don't have to guard the same position. If we're talking about two smaller point guards who neither of them can guard up, that's a challenge. If we're talking about Nikola Jokic and Joel Embiid being on the same roster, yeah, that would be a challenge. But I think that in the wings, especially like where Boston has Tatum and Brown, there's enough versatility there that they're going to be fine.
Interesting. So you like the two of them together?
I do, very much.
Interesting. Okay. I mean, to each his own, I guess. I'm not a fan of that, but it's fine. So I want to run through a couple of draft day hot takes that I had.
Okay.
And I want you to kind of pick out one that you either strongly disagree with or strongly agree with. Give me 1 second to pull this up. What was the date of the draft?
It was July 28th, 29th.
You're almost there. I have 7 scouting events to run through all the tweets for. All right. Here we go. All right. So my first one, Josh Primo has a longer NBA career than Jonathan Kuminga.
Okay.
I actually had a thread of all of the things that Kendrick Perkins said. he was talking about Isaiah Todd, and he said Kyle Kuzma with the better IQ. Oh, that one killed me. Let's see. Sorry, give me one more moment. There we go. I found the thread. All right, so the Kuminga and Primo one was definitely my hottest take. I like Day'Ron over Isaiah Todd. I like Jared Butler over Davion Mitchell. I feel like I'm going to regret that one after watching Davion play a little bit of defense. I take a swing on Kai Jones before Jalen Johnson. Cameron Thomas is a top 10 prospect. Jaden Springer is the safest non-lotto guy in the draft. McKinley Wright will have a long NBA career, about, or if not over 10 years. EJ Onu will be the why wasn't he drafted higher guy. Keon's bust potential is much higher than the consensus is discussing. Miles McBride and Jared Butler are top 15 guys. Picks 25 through 30 will have better NBA careers than 10 through 15, which I don't think will pan out. I like Cam Thomas better than Moses Moody. This one's not very hot. Bones averages 12 plus in year one. And I'm going to butcher his name pronunciation, but Blazenberg. I like him more than Garuba. So I guess pick whatever you like or dislike out of that mess.
Brandon Blindberg over Garuba. Ooh, that may steal me away. I'm going to go with the one that I've been thinking about for the last 10 seconds here. Jaden Springer being the safest guy outside the top 10, something I disagree with. I think I do. And
do you have someone else in mind, or you don't like his outcomes?
I don't like his outcomes. I had him as a mid-30s guy, mid to late 30s guy. Okay. And I'll tell you why.
I got you.
So you're, in my mind, in terms of team building in the NBA, you're either a focal point of a team that has the rest of the roster built around you and your strengths, because you're a top 3 guy that can lead them to a championship level performance, or you're a fill-in player around that, where you're great at one or two things that allows you to see the floor and have utility next to those franchise pillars, okay. Right? As we were talking about with Brooklyn, you're either the Kyrie Irving, James Harden, Kevin Durant, or you're the lob-catching big like Nick Claxton who can switch on defense. You're the gravity movement shooter like Joe Harris. You're the defensive glue guy like Bruce Brown. Like whatever it is, you fit a niche and a hole in that team. I don't think Jaden Springer has the offensive creation ability to end up being a pillar. I don't see that from him in his time at Tennessee. It didn't captivate my eye. I think he's a really good passer. And I know that he shot 43 and change % from 3, but I don't trust the sample size. I don't trust his ability to create for himself off the bounce in terms of his jump shot. And I do have concerns about guys who are fully 2-foot jumpers at the rim. So there was enough there for me to offensively say, okay, he's probably not going to project out as a pillar of an offense to me. And then I'm trying to think about what is the role that he has or that I can see him having that would allow him to fill in the gaps and be that great guy. I think he's a tremendous on-ball defender. I'm not trying to take that away from him. But what is he going to do on offense? And it comes down to me to not buying the jump shot. I didn't buy the mechanics. I think that he is the epitome of a small sample size kind of fooling you into thinking that's going to be his role. And if you look at how the Sixers have kind of talked about him since picking him, they talk about him a lot as more of a 3-and-D guy. And I think that that's probably the best outcome for a guy like Springer. But I also don't buy the jump shot enough to say that he ends up just being a D guy.
Yeah.
And to me, that's a second-round prospect in this year's draft, where there was enough offensive talent, and there were a lot of other guys who I saw offensive upside for in this class that dropped him down to that area.
So the one area of disagreement that I have is I don't have numbers and advanced stats that PD would pull up to run across the ticker here, but I really trust what he does in the paint as far as, getting to his spot. I watched him play probably 4 or 5 times in high school. Like we played against them at DeMatha. When he gets into the paint, he's making the right decision. He's finding the guy in the corner. He's getting the right angle for a pass, the pocket pass dump off to the weak side block. He's getting the right angle for a shot in the paint. I just think that his operation and his IQ in the paint is enough to get by offensively. I agree that I don't think he's going to be a knockdown lights out shooter. I think he can eventually be, a 33, 34% shooter. And because, like I said, I trust him in the paint to make good decisions and make good things happen. And I guess that's why I'm higher on him than some others.
I think with all that said, like the concerns that I have on the creation stuff, I think he's a very good decision maker in the lane, but he doesn't put enough pressure on the rim to me. He's got a slower first step and loves to eye guys up instead of being a quick rip guy off the catch, which always deters me when you're in an off-ball role. I want you to make quick decisions and get past your guy quickly. And I also don't think I think he's more methodical of a driver than quick and explosive. He uses his strength and his body well, but I don't think he does enough to draw help defenses to him, which might negate some of that great playmaking ability. And again, your question here was the safest pick outside of that top 10. I'm not saying that he's a guy that I totally dislike and wouldn't want on my team, but I have a hard time believing he's the safest because of all of these different factors.
Who is your safest pick? Let's go brief on this, though, because I got a couple more.
Okay. I think Moses Moody was the safest guy for me.
Where do you go again?
Golden State.
Golden State. Oh, well, yeah, that helps. When you have Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, and Draymond, and Steve Kerr calling the shots, that's –
But he is who he is. Stand on the perimeter, knock down shots, get an offensive rebound or two, use your length, and be smart. He already played that way at Arkansas. I think he's going to be just fine.
Okay. All right. So we're going to go into the quick hitter portion, then we'll get out of here. What was the first time that you were in a room when you realized you had a long way to go about your knowledge of the game? You felt like you didn't know as much or know anything about the game of basketball.
Probably the first time I sat in a coach's meeting at Dickinson as a sophomore in college, just sitting there listening to how structured and how much format and intention to detail behind every little thing that they did was really out there.
Gotcha. Best player you've played against or coached against who never made it to the league?
Never made it to the league?
Yeah.
I'm going to say Jaden Ivey because he hasn't made it yet, but that's, I guess, a cop-out answer.
I love his game. I'm a big fan. Who's a historical coach you wish you could have played for?
John Wooden.
This is really random, but I throw it in there anyways. Game show that you think you'd win?
Stump the Schwab.
I love that. Not the answer I thought you were going to give me. Invite 3 basketball minds to a dinner to chop it up with.
All right. John Wooden. I want to get Michael Jordan. favorite player, guy who inspired all that in me. And probably my favorite player outside of that, JJ Redick.
Man. I will say one thing on JJ. Obviously, like the rest of the world outside of Durham, I absolutely hated JJ Redick in college, but in the NBA, it's so hard not to like him, especially if you like his podcast. I mean, I mean, I hate his tattoo sleeve. I absolutely hate his tattoos, but he seems like a great guy. If you were a college athlete and the NIL came about and you were going to be sponsored or have some deal with one company or one restaurant, what would it be?
Messino's Pizza across the street from the gym at Dickinson College. Those Bambino pizzas got me through college. I would definitely don a Messino's t-shirt.
That was a quick one. You were ready. All right. MJ or LeBron? I think I know.
MJ.
What book is a must read for every basketball coach?
Win in the Dark.
By who?
I gotta look up the author right now. I actually just finished reading it. And it's by two different guys. But it's an unbelievable book. Josh Medcalf and Lucas Jaden.
Okay.
It's an unbelievable book.
What's it about?
Slacklining, the kind of activity or sport, I guess. You put a tightrope or a slack line from tree to tree, and you have to tightrope across it, all those different categories. It's essentially about that is the vehicle for teaching you about the real work that you do is in practice. It's not in front of the crowd in all these different areas. It's about your mentality, how you handle adversity, and what you're willing to do when the lights aren't on.
Got you. Would you rather take a charge from Shaq or try to guard KD with the game on the line?
I'll guard KD. I'm soft.
What's the best dynasty in sports? Doesn't have to be current.
UCLA basketball under Wooden in the 70s.
Did you read his book, by the way, or the book about him?
Yeah, I've read 7 or 8 Wooden books. Yeah.
It was great. Underrated Twitter follow.
Underrated Twitter follow. Wow. I don't know if they're underrated anymore, but Slapping Glass.
Not the first time I've gotten that answer from a guest. I love it. What was the first? We already did that one. What coaches do you study, and what do you study about their teams?
I studied a lot of Brad Stevens, and even before he was with the Boston Celtics, because of his demeanor and how he carries himself on the sidelines. Kind of somebody whose in-game demeanor I wanted to emulate, and how intentional he is about every interaction he has with his players on the floor. I have done a lot on Wooden in the past, but I think current guys right now, in terms of what they run and how they run a program, Jay Wright has to be the number one, kind of up there for me. So fascinated with everything that they do at Villanova.
I thought it was really cool too when he was talking about how they had some success at Villanova, and then after they lost to UNC, I believe he said that they changed the recruiting and they were kind of going after 5 stars and stuff. And then I think it was pretty much when the Javon Quinterly situation happened, they're like, all right, we need to pivot back to recruiting our guys. And
Aaron, I'm going to change my book thing. Actually, I know I said Win in the Dark, still a great book, but Growth by Carol Dweck, about the growth mindset. I think it's necessary for players and coaches to read.
Yeah, I'm learning stuff too today. What's the hardest shot in basketball?
The hardest shot? If you're right-handed, it's running on an out-of-bounds play to the left corner and having to take a left corner jumper. If you're lefty, it's vice versa. Momentum with your chest taking you to the baseline. You've got to square and fire that way with your inside shoulder, where a defender can impact the shot right away.
Unless you got that Ray Allen travel sidestep down pat. I'm just taking shots at people today. I didn't even mean to do that. All right. The last portion of every podcast is I kind of turn the tables and I ask my guests to ask me a question. So what do you got for me?
if you had to give any player or parents going through the high school ranks one recommendation and piece of honest advice that is going to carry them through picking a school for college, what would your best piece of advice be?
Does it have to be just one thing?
Floor is yours.
So be realistic is number one. You know, 5'10" white dudes don't make it to the NBA. You just need to understand that there's and that goes into the next one, which is, you know, fit. Fit is the most important thing in a recruiting process. You could have the correct school, you know, in the correct area, you know, your friends are going there, your girlfriend's going there. But if you don't like the coach and you go there, it's going to be hell. Or if you only like the coach and you're only going to that school for him, and all of a sudden he leaves and takes another job, where are you now? I think fit is something that parents need to examine quite a bit more. And I'll keep it brief. And the third and final one will be, you know, something that Coach Jones, we were having a team coaches meeting about a particular parent that was, we'll just say, unrealistic about the expectations for their son. And he was talking about, you know, Dwayne Simpkins also said the worst times for every coach's life is the 5 minutes in the car before the game and the 5 minutes in the car after the game. But coach said, like, the frustration, and it was just at some point he said, look, you brought your son to DeMath, you put him in my care, trust me to do my job. And that goes for players too. You know, you chose to come here. I didn't make you come here unless it's a public school. You chose to come here. You wanted to be here. You know, trust the process, but also trust me, trust the coaches that are around you, and trust your teammates. Because there's so many times that, you know, I've talked to players who went D3, and their mindset before they even hit campus was, I need to ball out so I can transfer up to D2. And I think just, you know, trusting, if you put all of your effort into something and you trust the right people and you actually give them that trust, you know, I think things are going to work out how they should. I think a lot of the time, you know, it's really just, you realize that you're fighting against the current, and that goes for parents as well. And I really like something that Doug said from Team Takeover on our last podcast, as far as parents go, kind of more geared towards them. I said, you know, before a big game, is there anything that coaches or, you know, parents should say to the players? You know, is there some angle or some rah thing, or, you know, what do you recommend? He's like, nothing. Just don't say anything at all. Just treat it like it's every other game, because otherwise it's putting, you know, so much pressure on a kid. And, you know, I feel so bougie, you know, referencing my own tweets, but I had a tweet earlier this summer because it was so frustrating when you're watching a basketball game and you can clearly tell that the kid is playing the basketball game and he's also dealing with the parent in his ear, and it's affecting their game. And then, you know, as it gets worse for them, the parent just keeps going. It's like, you don't understand that if you just shut up, your kid would probably play, you know, much better. And that goes back to the trust in the process thing. You know, like a particular parent was yelling at their kid to you know, stop standing still. He was standing on the wing and they were playing a 2-3 zone. I'm like, that's exactly where he should be. It's exactly where he should be. That's exactly where his coach told him to be. So I guess just, you know, trusting the coach that you put in charge of your plan, you know, trusting the teammates around you, and just kind of letting the chips fall where they may. Because when you try to deviate from that, that's when bad things happen.
Appreciate that. And Aaron, I just want to say thank you for, again, having me on, giving me a platform to talk about boys Latin basketball and my journey and background. But more than anything, looking forward to seeing you out in person more now that I'm in this area, collaborating with you in the future. And again, just really thankful for the work that you do for the game of basketball to help promote guys through Prep Hoops and everything within this area. You do invaluable work.
Thank you. So let's you know, tell the people where they can find you on social media and on YouTube and all your platforms.
Yeah, at the end of the day, just search Adam Spinella and I pop up. There aren't a ton of us out there, but Spinella 14 is the Twitter handle, and then Adam Spinella is my YouTube channel name for any written work that we have analyzing the draft for the game of basketball. It's at the Box and One. which you can also find on Twitter or theboxandone.weebly.com.
Fantastic. Thanks for the time, man. You take care. We'll see you soon.
Thanks, Aaron.